Wow, I look like a hipster therapist who's about to talk to you about all your issues with tanking. Cue the intro. Hey guys, what is going on? Shah here, and today we're going to talk tanks. We're going to talk tank choice going into Shadowlands and what you should be looking for when making that decision. Now, the expansion is coming up pretty close. We got about 5 to 6 weeks left. Supposedly, we haven't seen, as of the recording of this video, we have not seen a pre-patch launch date, but the expansion launch date has been confirmed to be end of October. So that's what we're looking out for. So the latest tuning patch on the beta build has been released. I did a video about it. You can check out the link above for that if you missed it. But essentially, I went through the tuning changes and what happened and where tanks have adjusted on kind of a quote-unquote tier list, my own tier list. And it's time to start looking to see what tank you want to play. So today, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. This is more of a subjective thought video. A lot of you guys have been asking me either what tank you should play, or a lot of people are just saying like, oh, rip warrior, F guardian druid, like rest in peace. And I want to do a video talking about where I think the tanks are going to be able to perform content-wise, depending on what kind of content you want to be doing. I will not be covering PvP in this video. I don't know a whole lot about PvP, especially when it comes to like threes. In RBGs, there's certain tanks that perform better than others, especially in maps like flag carrying or domination, so Arathi Basin, and Battle for Gilneas. So if you're looking for that kind of information, this is not the video for you. This is entirely looking at Mythic Plus, how tanks are going to perform, and raid in a raid setting. So we're going to just jump right in. So I'm going to get one thing out of the way right away, which is warrior. There has been a lot of negative stipulation for this class. It's had a lot of bad feedback, which is good. Blizzard needs to hear how, like, the kind of position that warriors are in currently, which is just not a good state. So right now they're just taking a lot of damage. They're falling over pretty easily. They're not doing a lot of damage, and their covenant options are pretty lackluster. So with that being said, if you are a warrior main, if you are a diehard warrior main, this is not a tank that you should give up on. This is a warrior, more than likely, fingers crossed, we'll see some buffs in the future. They normally scale better with stats anyways, but if you are a casual player looking to do AOTC, looking to get your weekly chest done, doing a couple casual Mythic Plus runs, this tank will probably be a fine choice. You can keep playing warrior. If you're coming out of BFA playing this warrior as a meta tank, I recommend swapping off of it. The class feels a lot different. I think it still feels good to play, but warrior just inherently feels worse because it's missing a lot of the borrowed power systems that it fed off of in BFA, and a lot of reworks to different talents, and their covenant options just are very lackluster, and it just doesn't feel like it's in a good state for more casual for hardcore content. For casual content, the warrior will perform fine. AOTC and Mythic Plus, like I said, is a fine choice for that. With that out of the way, I'm going to now talk about the other tanks in different environments, from Raid to Mythic Plus, and I'm going to throw in some crappy B-roll footage of me doing some heroics on some of the random tanks on beta, or some like low Mythic Plus. So enjoy those videos. But going forward, I want to quickly talk about Raid, mainly because I like to focus on Mythic Plus, and I'm not going to be Raid tanking this tier unless my Raid team needs me to fill in a couple times. But when it comes to Raid, there are typically two tanks that you want to primarily focus on. So if you're going for a cutting edge progression, Hall of Fame kind of level, there's typically two tanks that you're going to want to play on because they bring a lot of benefits to the raid that you normally don't get on other tanks. So first things first, Brewmaster Monk. The Stagger damage taken profile is extremely, extremely strong for raid, and then they bring a physical damage taken debuff to the targets that they hit. So anyone who's meleeing, so all melee DPS are going to love you for being in the raid. Even your healers who are doing any kind of like kitty weaving or fist weaving or hitting the boss with judgments and stuff, and their Crusader strikes are going to really like you for this because auto attacks are obviously physical damage, as well as like the oddball of Shaman using Earthquake, which is a physical damage spell. So classes like this are really, really going to enjoy Monk. Another good option for Raid is Blood Death Knight. Blood Death Knight has just the way that their toolkit works counteracts a lot of issues or things that arise in the raid encounter. So large bursts of damage can be pretty much covered by Death Strike. So as long as the DK is pooling runic power to Death Strike, it's easily covered in that area. They also bring a lot of group utility like Death Grip, Corfine's Grasp, as well as anti-magic zone. So now this is a group DR that is just going to benefit and is just another boon that DKs bring to the raid compared to what they've done in the past. But DKs have always just been a really strong tank. They have an answer for almost everything, as well as their self-healing is out of this world. And they normally bring pretty good damage and almost like a range AoE with Death and Decay. So mobs that are coming into the fight, they can just easily bring in. And same with Brewmaster with their statue as well. So both of these tanks are extremely strong to have in raid. And if you are pushing a high-end level, these two classes are going to be what you want to choose. If you're just progging CE casually or just doing some mythic progression, any of the other tanks, probably outside of Warrior, will be a good choice. Warrior is just going to be in a spot, at least at the start, where it's going to be difficult to keep them up. It's going to take a lot of attention from the healers. So if you're looking to raid, anything but Warrior. But if you're looking to push very, very hard or very fast, Brewmaster or DK is probably the best choice. So moving on to Mythic Plus. I want to talk about where the classes are currently. So if you're looking to push the highest form of Mythic Plus content, if you are in the top 0.1% of players who are sitting at like the 6.5 to 7k IO range currently on BFA, if you're those type of players, there's going to be an obvious choice. And that's going to come down to tuning. There's still changes that can be made because this is still beta, but it's looking like you're probably going to be playing like, again, Brewmaster or Blood DK, just two classes that are looking really, really strong right now. But this doesn't mean you can't play the other tanks in a competitive scene, or in Mythic Plus on different classes. Even in BFA, despite Guardian Druid being the least represented tank, Tomobor on US Horde Illidan made it into the top 10 tanks in the world, despite the Warrior being the obvious meta. If you look through the top 100 tanks, 95% of them are Warriors. So he is that like super rare 1%. So with that being said, some tanks, despite them not being absolutely meta, if put enough practice, if put enough time with the right composition, can still perform well, despite the counter pressures that are coming into play from the dungeons, and obviously the way that Blizzard decides to tune different classes and dungeons and damage profiles. If you're looking to push high-end keys, very, very high-end keys, those are going to be good tanks to play, but realistically what it's going to come down to is what tank are you most comfortable on, and which tank benefits the group composition that you're going for. If you're, playing with a certain DPS lineup and a certain healer, there might be a better tank for that than just picking Blood DK just because the Blood DK is looking like the best tank right now, or Monk's looking like the best tank right now. So this decision often comes down to what your group's going to be playing and what DPS are looking like to be really strong, or what kind of profile of both damage and healing that the group needs to bring to the key. So these are all things you need to keep in mind. So essentially what it boils down to is as long as you're not playing Warrior, almost any tank is going to be able to perform. It's just some classes are going to take a little bit more work than others, and that's what I'm trying to get to. So we're going to talk about how the tanks work, what their toolkits look like. I'm not going to talk about every little detail, but I'm going to kind of talk about the difference between a selfish tank and a selfless tank. Now, this is kind of a spectrum that I kind of view the tanks on. Now, there isn't a direct, the most selfish tank possible, and there isn't the most selfless tank possible, because tanks all fall on this spectrum. But I can kind of categorize it in three categories. You have obviously selfish, selfless, and kind of in the middle. So, selfish tanks. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a tank that's not going to bring as much group utility and is going to focus a little bit more on keeping themselves alive and their own throughput. These classes include Demon Hunter and Death Knight. These are classes that primarily focus on self-healing and using kind of CC and using different kind of cooldowns to rotate through to keep themselves alive at all costs. And them keeping themselves alive means that the group is going to keep themselves alive as well. Their hope is that their other DPS and the healer in the group are also going to play at the caliber that they're playing at and perform at the caliber that they're playing at. So if you are a player who likes to just focus on yourself, focus on the tanking duty, making sure you're having aggro, making sure that mobs aren't attacking your targets, and making sure you're controlling mobs in a specific way to cater towards your toolkit, is how these tanks typically operate. Now, the big difference between these two is that one can jump higher and one is more mobile. If you can't guess which that is, that's the Demon Hunter. And on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have our selfless tanks. Prop Paladin, which is more of an obvious choice, and as well as I would argue Guardian Druid in a little bit different of a way. So Prop Paladins bring an immense amount of utility that focuses on keeping their group alive and focusing on applying boons to the group. So things like Hand of Sacrifice. If your DPS is going to take a lot of damage, or there's like a specific point where like one player is lower health than the others and there's group damage coming out, or there's a player in your group being fixated by a mob, Hand of Sacrifice is awesome. There's Blessing of Protection, Blessing of Freedom, Lay on Hands, and then you also have things like Bubble and Off Healing, like with their Word of Glory, Flash of Light. There's just so much in the Paladin toolkit that helps the raid, or not your raid, but your Mythic dungeon group succeed by bringing that kind of utility. Consecration being a permanent slow if taken a certain talent choice. There's just so much that the Paladin has to offer, where you're focusing more on keeping your group in a position where they feel like they can play in the most optimal way possible, because they can be a little bit more lenient on what kind of damage they're going to be taking, because the Paladin's going to be assisting with that. And same with same with Guardian Druid. Guardian Druid is a tank that brings a lot of off healing, brings a lot of utility and roots and knocks, and they can also bring a lot of damage in certain environments. So if you're a raid tank, Heart of the Wild talent with like a Feral Affinity or Balance Affinity can do a lot of damage, or Resto Affinity can do a lot of healing. You can shift in and out of bear form to actually become a healer for a very short bit, or become a DPS for a very short bit. So in a raid setting, this is very, very useful. In Mythic Plus, it's a little bit harder to achieve this, but essentially what it comes down to is that you have ways to assist the group through your toolkit, because you're given that toolkit. Unlike a Demon Hunter, logging into your Demon Hunter, you have like 8 buttons on your bar, but Druid, you have a fairly good amount of stuff in your toolkit. So this is a tank that brings a lot. Guardian Druid also notoriously brings battle res. So that and Blood DK are two good tanking choices, because they bring that, so it loosens the restriction of the healer that you need to bring to your group, being, Resto Druid is the only healer with battle res. So, and then kind of right in the middle, they lean either way, but Monk and Warrior are a little bit more, like, they're on the line. They're a little selfish, but they're a little selfless. They bring group utility, like Warrior bring Commanding Shout. They bring Battle Shout. They bring a good amount of CC, like Fear, Shockwave, which is an AoE stun. They also bring like things like Intervene. And they have a couple interesting conduits as well to help benefit their group. But you're not going to see a Warrior healing someone when they're low on health, or you're not going to see a Warrior rezzing someone if someone dies in combat and then the pull ends. On the other hand, you have Monk, who's going to focus on more like Ring of Peace, using things like if you take the talent, but using like the Black Ox statue. They have a little bit of off feeling. They're pretty self-reliant, and Stagger is going to allow them to take a little less damage up front, so they're able to focus on making sure their healer is able to keep them up through their Stagger debuff, as well as dropping Stagger and certain things like that. So they're a little bit more selfish when it comes to like the damage that they're taking, but they're bringing so much CC like Leg Sweep, like Ring of Peace, things of this nature that allow their group to succeed in certain ways, to create area of denial for mobs, to knock mobs, to stop casts from going off with paralysis and their kick, obviously. So Monk, not having as much healing throughput as Paladin and Guardian Druid, will still bring kind of that off healing to the group, as well as a similar way of keeping things CC'd as you might see most of the tanks being able to offer, but a little bit more towards kind of like the Demon Hunter side. So you're going to see them be a little bit more selfless in that aspect. I now want to talk about the difficulty to play. So this is going to be for a section of people who literally just don't know what kind of content they want to do yet, and they just want to kind of experience tanking for the first time. They want to get into being that bulwark for their group, whether it's raid or for Mythic Plus. Tanking is a lot of fun. There's more nuances with it. It's kind of hard to justify a good tank, and it comes through the little things like how well a dungeon is executed and the pathing through a dungeon, or just a raid boss going down. A lot of times they're like the refs. They're like the refs of WoW. You either hate them or you don't notice them. So tank's a lot of fun. If you are a first-time player and you have no idea what you're doing, here is my recommendation for tanks based on difficulty. So, first things first, I would say the easiest classes to play would be Guardian Druid and Demon Hunter, I would argue. And here's why. Some of you might argue with me on this, but I think Demon Hunter, the rotation of Demon Hunter is very, very simple. The use of sigils can be a little bit more difficult, but if you look at the buttons that they have in their toolkit, they have like 8 buttons on their bar. They have like an AoE, a semi-spender, mitigation, and a big cooldown, along with a couple of sigils that help with utility. That is the most simplistic tank you could possibly get. Now, there's obviously talent choices and a little bit more nuance to the class, but I think in a general stance, Demon Hunters are currently taking a fair bit of... They have a lot of passive mitigation through just like taking reduced damage compared to other tanks, and their rotation is pretty simple. It's a good tank to pick up. It does play a little bit different than a lot of other tanks with like the mobility and like the way that they interact with their group, but for the most part, it's a pretty easy tank to play. But obviously the one that is well known to be the easiest tank is Guardian Druid, and Guardian Druid is my main. It's the tank that I've been playing for the last couple seasons now. It's pretty straightforward, right? You do damage, and that damage generates rage, and you use that rage on mitigation, and you literally cannot overlap this mitigation, unlike other classes, you can spam iron for all you want, because it stacks up to 8 times, and the more stacks you have, the more armor you're going to get, which is just great in its entirety. So it's pretty straightforward. You do your AoE damage, you do your single target damage, and as you're doing these, you generate rage, and you spend it on mitigation. It's a very straightforward. Now, similar to DH with sigils, the complexity comes in the toolkit that Guardian Druid offers. They have a lot of things like root, off healing, stuns, speed boosts. They have different forms that they can shift into to do different things as well. So Guardian Druid, in its like the philosophical way that Guardian Druid is designed, is very easy to tank, but the things outside of that make it more difficult to play. But I would say if you're first learning to pick up tanks, those are 2 easy choices. I would say things that are a little bit more difficult to play would be Warrior, because Warrior has 2 forms of mitigation. They have Ignore Pain and Shield Block. Shield Block you have charges of. Any class that has charges of their mitigation has to pay attention a little bit more to how you're spending those charges. At certain points, the different damage profiles that are coming out, you're about to take a lot of auto attacks, put up a Shield Block charge, but you can't overlap them, because if you overlap them, then you're making it so you don't have those charges for a longer period of time, which can end up being fatal. So you want to be careful of that. So I would say Warrior's a little bit more difficult to play. And then I would put Monk on this line. Monk is an interesting mechanic with Stagger. So you're going to take damage, but instead of taking it up front like most tanks do, you're going to be staggering it off. The damage is going to be applied as a dot over time, and it's your job to control how much stagger you're going to be taking at a certain point. So once you get to a certain amount of stagger level, you can purify that stagger off and drop it, or you can drop it through other methods like Touch of Death. Touch of Death now drops stagger based on the damage you do, and you want to drop stagger like in this way, or using a cooldown, invoke the Black Ox. So things like that. Just the stagger mechanic, while it's simple and passive, is a little bit more of a nuance to play, and then the new shuffle mechanic that was just re-implemented, or I guess it's not new, it used to be in the game, but now that they reintroduced it, you just have to kind of pay attention a little bit more about how your rotation is like playing out. You want to make sure you have shuffle up during the proper times. I would say those are 2 tanks that are a little bit more difficult to play compared to Druid and Demon Hunter. And then lastly, at the high end, if you're a player who likes to have a big brain, I would say Paladin and Death Knight are a little bit more difficult to play. And the reason for this is, I'll start with Paladin. Paladin just has, similar to Guardian Druid, a lot in their toolkit, and their answer for their mitigation isn't always straightforward. So how it works is essentially you generate holy power using just kind of base abilities, and then you spend that holy power on either healing yourself or mitigation. Now, in most circumstances, you want to mitigate, but sometimes you want to use Word of Glory to heal yourself when you're low or to save an ally. And that cost has to be weighed out on a pull-to-pull, a second-to-second basis, which is kind of what makes them a little bit difficult. Now, they also have a large toolkit to answer with certain things. If you're low on health, but you need to mitigate because you're taking a lot of incoming damage, you can obviously lay on hands, and you can do other things of that sort. You can start kiting, you can CC some mobs, you can blinding light, whatever. You have answers to things. But that weighing out that decision almost on every single pull is going to be extremely difficult for a lot of players to do. And the change is, it's a little bit easier to do now compared to BFA, where you had charges of Shield of the Righteous, but now with Shield of the Righteous sharing holy power with Word of Glory, you have to make that decision. And because there's so much in the toolkit, it's just kind of hard to wrap your mind around all the answers you can have to the different situations, and you have to react as things are happening, which a lot of other tanks don't have to do because they're so focused on their job. And that's the thing that comes with playing a more selfless tank, is that you have to focus on other things that are going on in the pull compared to just being able to kind of just do whatever you're doing to stay alive. Lastly, we have Death Knight. Death Knight is, like I said, is probably the most difficult tank to play, and here's why. They're like one of the only tanks that doesn't really rely on active mitigation or a passive mitigation like Stagger. They, for the most part, take all of their damage up front, and then they heal it back with Death Strike. Now, that I know that's not entirely true, because there's ways to mitigate through like Bone Shield and different DRs, Rune Tap, Icebound Fortitude. They have a lot of answers for a lot of things. They have a lot in their toolkit. They have a lot of DRs. They have a lot of utility as well with like Death Grip and Gorfien's Grasp and AMZ and AMS. Death Striking. But why they're difficult to play? You have a few different resources, and you have a lot of things you have to keep track of. You have to keep track of your Bone Shield stacks for Marrowrend. You also have to keep track of 2 different resource pools. You have runes and you have runic power. Spending runes gives you runic power, and spending runic power can regenerate runes, or like it's just kind of this back and forth cycle that's kind of difficult to play around. And then not capping on runic power. Now that's the big thing, is that like you can hit these caps on runic power, so you have to be playing the balance between that, and plus because you also have to be paying attention to bone shield charges and how much damage you're taking in the last few seconds at almost all points of the dungeon to know when you should optimize your death strike. it's just a difficult nuance for a lot of players to kind of grasp, especially because all of the other tanks play so differently than Blood DK. Most tanks just actively mitigate, where Blood DK reactively, quote-unquote, pseudo-mitigates by just healing back. So their just playstyle is so much different than all the other tanks, and that's why it's so weird, and that's why I would say it's one of the more difficult tanks to play, just because of the resources, the amount of things it has in its toolkit, and just balancing generation to spending all the way down to like Death Strike optimization. And there's just so many little things about Death Knight that make it difficult to play, at least for me. So with that being said, I want to take a quick look at kind of not a tier list. This isn't a tier list. Think of these as categories or sections. So casual players, Warrior is a fine choice, and anything above this is a fine choice. So basically, if you look and move up, is a fine choice for you. If you're a semi-hardcore player looking to do cutting-edge content, looking to push Mythic keys, any of these tanks are pretty much fine except Warrior. And if you're an absolute tryhard, Monk and DK are going to be good in both Raid and in Mythic Plus currently. Now, things are still subject to change. It is still beta. I'm going to drop this warning as much as I possibly can. So, looking at this graph here that you guys see, this hopefully kind of gives you a good representation of what tanks to play. And I do kind of want to look at the selfish versus selfless tanks, because I know that was a long topic. But you have your selfish tanks like Death Knight, Demon Hunter, and Warrior kind of towards that top section. And then towards the bottom section, a little bit more selfless tanks. You have Paladin, Guardian Druid, and then kind of more towards the center, you have Brewmaster Monk. So these tanks are kind of, it's just a play style of the tank based on your personal preference. Without further ado, that is pretty much the end of this video. I just wanted to talk about where the tanks are performing, because a lot of you guys are saying like rip Guardian Druid, rip Warrior, which is true. You know, I was really looking forward to this class. I was looking forward to this. How do you guys think this is going to be? And this is just my opinion. This simply comes down to what I think and how the tanks are going to perform, and there's obviously a lot of things to take in mind. So, going forward, I'm going to still update you guys. I'm going to try to do another analysis video at logs once more logs are available, so keep an eye out for that. If you are looking for content that's a little bit more objective as I can try to make it, unlike this video, hit that subscribe button, and you will be sure to be notified as soon as I release that video in the next upcoming weeks. I'm going to be doing some other cool stuff with that, with logs as well, in the next upcoming days, so look out for that. Now, any of my Guardian Druid mains out there, if you know that I'm a main Guardian Druid, I have some more Guardian Druid content coming as well, so all the more reasons you should hit that sub button if you aren't subscribed already. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys are having a great rest of your day or evening or whenever time you are watching this video, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.